Not what yesterday's too. Obviously, I took the Browns, the quarterbacks, and their offense altogether to task for looking pretty poor. Well, when good things are good and bad things are bad, that's how we do the reporting, right? Well, it was a much, much improved effort by the Cleveland Browns offense today, highlighted by rookie quarterback Shador Sanders. We'll break it all down on the OBR streaming network beginning now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate everybody who comes on out to the OBR every day, whether it is for the written content from our fabulous group of writers. You're getting top-notch information from Fred Greetham, who's been at practice every day. Of course, all of you who come out every evening beginning at 6 o'clock to the OBR streaming network, beginning with Browns 3D. We're going to do a little bonus episode here. We had a Saturday practice. We might as well get you a Saturday report. So, we're going to break that down obviously a little bit. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. And of course, head on over to OBR.com, sign up for the VIP insider access. You will get the insider forums. You will get Ask the Analysts, all that great stuff. You can try to bend the mind, of course, the fantastic Lane Atkins. So make sure you look into that, a very, very small amount, and then that will actually grow into a subscription to Paramount Plus as well. A little BOGO action. Who does not like twofers, right? So yesterday, as you guys all know, I was very displeased. This offense just hasn't really gotten much done through the first 3 days of training camp. Now, they took to the field today, Saturday, last unpadded practice for a little bit. There will be an off day on Sunday. There were some, players still out. Jerome Ford out, Mike Woods out, cornerback Tony Brown out, offensive lineman Tevin Jenkins out. All believed to be minor injuries. And it could have possibly been that, hey, let's hold you out today, knowing you have the off day tomorrow, and we're putting pads on Monday. Browns will practice on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before their next scheduled off day on Thursday. We know pads are going on Monday. How the Browns handle it from there, we will, continue to monitor and obviously, wait for the information certainly on that. There was a signing today. We will get to that obviously in a minute as well. But the story of the day, and this was the first time I think that they probably gave Shador Sanders a little bit more, I would say, of a even playing field workload with the other quarterbacks. Joe didn't get a ton of work, but it makes sense at 40 years old. Again, Joe got a little work in today, let him get the extra rest on the day off tomorrow with everybody else, and then you kick it up a notch back up on Monday. But Shador probably had the nicest ball of camp to this point. Win a team drill. Luke Floria on the receiving end of it. Floria, look, I don't know if there's necessarily a chance for this guy to make this team, but he just keeps doing what he can do. And, who knows the way the wide receiver room shakes out. We all anticipate that, maybe there's a player or two that will eventually end up in this wide receiver room who's not currently here. But if anything, Luke Floria to this point is playing himself into a legitimate candidate for the Browns practice squad. Great to see, certainly from the local kid. But Shador got to, it was only participating with the twos and the threes. But Shador, this was probably the day I think that everybody was waiting for. And this was that day. And now there's going to be the case. And this is where it's certainly going to get interesting because everybody felt, hey, he's not getting the opportunities, that we were hoping for, and again, it's very difficult to do this on an equal basis when you're dealing with four quarterbacks. And there is really no basically totem pole. There's no death chart at how this is all going to work out. But here's going to be where it gets interesting is because of the day that Shador Sanders had today. Now, everybody's going to start to say, does this shift things? And they're legitimate questions, because to this point, Shador has only gotten a limited amount of work and mostly with the threes. And everything to this point has looked pretty good. But now, where he gets a little bit of a heavier workload, works his way up to actually playing and participating with some of the twos and looks good. There was a red zone touchdown pass to Deontay Johnson. There was another third touchdown pass, within the drills. And obviously it's hard to equate these situations and equate them to what a whole NFL drive would be, of course. But theirs is now, I think, the point where, I think the Shador Sanders crowd and, all the Boulder and the antis, they're going to start chiming in a little bit louder about Shador Sanders. And that's honestly rightfully so. It was hard to understand why he wasn't getting the opportunity, but now given the opportunity and succeeding like he did, now all of a sudden, if this goes back to where, he's the limited guy on Monday, people are going to have questions, legitimate and fair and honest questions about just how open this quarterback competition is. I was a little critical, of course, yesterday on Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, once Shador got hot, it kind of seemed like Kenny Pickett got hot, and kind of closed out practice for himself with a really good day today. I've been a little critical of Kenny Pickett to this point, because I really feel that I feel that it is veteran versus veteran as far as who makes the final Browns 53-man roster. And again, I don't know if I necessarily see any avenue where Kenny Pickett should be chosen over Joe Flacco. But being fair, Kenny Pickett did put his best forward today. So certainly, a nice job for Kenny Pickett today. When the way we talk about this thing is the good things are good, the bad things are bad. Obviously, when I was on yesterday, you heard and me going on about bad things being bad. Well, it was a little bit better today. In fact, it was a lot better today with a combined 5 touchdown passes from the quarterbacks. Dylan Gabriel got a little run as well. Some accuracy issues. Again, don't take these, completions per attempt numbers as Bible. Nothing in there certainly is equating for drops. Nothing in there is equating for, pressure. These are not advanced metric stats. These are just people seeing the ball leave the quarterback's hand and they're judging whether or not it was caught. That's it. So, and even on one of Pickett's, touchdown throws today, Isaiah McGuire is basically telling anybody that will listen that, the whistle was blown and that he had indeed sacked Kenny Pickett on said play. But for Shador and even still, Shador's best day thus far. And the thing with Shador is the work ethic has been since the second he got to Ohio. It's been there. Certainly, the speeding tickets, put a little damper on the cloud of things for a little bit. But, Shador, it's been working and it's consistently working. It's consistently throwing and trying to hone his craft. Shador was still on the field 30 minutes after practice today. And, there was the opportunity for some guys to stay and continue working. And, a lot of guys took opportunity with that. Shador being one of them, Dylan Gabriel as well. But Shador was still out there after his best day, still going after it well near 30 minutes after practice had officially ended. Shador Sanders is going to fight this fight. You know what I'm saying? They're going to have to slam the door in his face before he is told, where or that he is not in contention for this Browns quarterback job. And, anywhere Shador Sanders has ever got his entire life, he's been the starting quarterback. So why would he act or anything like he does not believe, he has a legitimate opportunity to be the starting quarterback? It is a weird scenario, obviously, where Shador was a 5th-round pick, but that doesn't matter now. Shador is in camp. He's performing. He's performing well. He's working hard. He's working extra. He's doing anything you would ask of anybody. So even still, the guy who was once maybe thought of as a 1st-round pick, a possible top 5 pick, mm, but ended up going in round 5, and he's acting like a round 5 guy would. He's doing everything that is asked of him and then some. And now he got his opportunity today for a little bit bigger piece of the pie and balled out and showed extremely well. He's looked good in what we've seen to this point, while it's a smaller sample size and working with, not necessarily guys who are going to make the Cleveland Browns roster. The Browns now have themselves are in probably a tad bit of a pickle where he's shown just in one practice, and that's fair. I'll say that for the naysayers. Just in one practice, he's shown that, he can probably handle more. And maybe he should be more in contention here than at least it appears to be to this point. Shador Sanders, big time day today. The day the Sanders crowd was looking for. The wrist up crowd is excited. They are ready to go. And Shador Sanders certainly, proved their faith today with his play in training camp. As I said, the Browns did sign a player today, and man, do I not want to butcher this name. Tawa, Tawa, very simply, obviously, certainly has a Samoan background. Toataua. Played his collegiate ball at Nevada. Never really had much of a taste in the NFL. Had a couple of tryouts after his final time. He's played with the Michigan Panthers in the UFL last couple of years. Just finished playing in the UFL season. Had about 370 yards on the ground. I think it was 6 touchdowns. But you don't have Judkins here. Jerome Ford hasn't practiced yet, and we're putting on the pads Monday. And real quickly, once we're putting on the pads, you know, that's when it can pile up. You know what I'm saying? The injuries can definitely, certainly, start to pile up, and you're already thin at the running back position. So obviously, a really smart move to get somebody in here so quickly. Cedric Tillman returned to practice today for individual drills. Did not take part in the team activities. Did not take part in red zone, 7-on-7, any of those. It's good to hear that, yesterday was just a blip on the radar screen, hopefully, and understanding that it was probably the correct move today to just get him out there, just get him back moving again, get everything loose, make sure that there were no ill effects that anything happened yesterday. And, just like others, gets the day off tomorrow. And then we go to full pads on Monday. A lot of this from the first 4 practices, there are certainly, some things that you can probably take away from this. And then some other things that, it's a non-padded practice. There's only so much contact you're going to get. However, the pads are about to go on for Monday. And, this is kind of where you maybe separate the men from the boys, so to speak. And I think this is going to be paramount. We are talking a lot that we believe the Cleveland Browns, one of the phases of football for the Browns that we think they're going to be strong in is going to be the trenches, their offensive line and obviously the defensive line. We've talked for a couple days now about how they look really good, the offensive line, as far as the shape that everybody is in. Looks like everybody may have cut a little weight, make themselves, a little more quicker, in going back to the wide zone scheme. A lot of pulling. You saw a lot of motion today in the offense, something that we're told the Browns are trying to incorporate more. They've always had it, just didn't necessarily use it. But so now we're going to start to see, is this offensive line, you know, going to maybe get closer to the form we are familiar with these guys than, what happened towards the end of 2023. And certainly what happened towards the beginning of 2024, the offensive line was kind of rounding back into shape a little bit towards the end of 2024. Once everybody, because everybody came in basically injured or late in 2024. So by the time they kind of got their health back and, all their, ability working as one, it started to be a better product towards the end of the season. It didn't freaking matter at that point, obviously. Season was long, left for dead, but they were playing better. Now, maybe a little trimmed down, certainly ready to go within a system that a new offensive line coach, a system that they are certainly more comfortable with. They are more familiar with. These guys can probably make the calls in their sleep on the offensive line. So certainly with the pads going on, we're going to start to get to see, what the run game can look like and just whether or not, this offensive line is in fact going to physically look better and play better than they, have at times over the last 2 seasons. Now, this is also obviously, critical trench play. Now we, kind of transition it to the defensive line. Who knows how much Miles Garrett's going to be involved because Miles, the problem with a guy like Miles Garrett is Miles Garrett can screw up everything for your offense in practice. And, and the thing is, if he wants to single-handedly take it over, he probably could. But the thing is how much do you put Miles out there before he becomes a nuisance and the offense isn't necessarily getting the work that they need? Is he kind of just like disrupting things so much that it's, not helping having him out there? And the other thing you're not going to do to him is to say, oh, well, can you tone it down a little bit? Well, you tone it down a little bit. That's when guys end up getting injured. So you can't do that either. So there's really, no perfect scenario here. And, if anything, maybe it just limits the amount of reps that Miles gets, which isn't a terrible thing to consider and start doing with Miles. He is, going into his ninth season. So it makes all the sense in the world, that training camp practices don't mean much. So there's no reason for him to, be overextending, of course, or, wasting any of that immense talent in that body here in August, especially against his own team, of course. But this is where it's going to come into play, certainly, for Mason Graham, his first padded practices in the NFL. Mason has been described to this point as a sponge. His performance, his work ethic, his motor, everything is checking out and checking the boxes that the Browns thought and assumed that this young man was when they drafted him. But now it's, putting on the pads and it's going against grown men who have made, their career the interior offensive line. The Joel Batonios, the Ethan Posiks, the Wyatt Teller. These guys, Batonio and Teller, these guys will know the legitimacy of Mason Graham's game. And they should probably know it rather quickly. And, Mason Graham is, certainly a rookie and, certainly, a guy right now who's probably in a little shock and awe looking around and knowing, the names of the guys that he's competing against, knowing what their history is, knowing what their resume is. But still, the best thing for him is to go out there and compete and hopefully, string together some wins against these guys who have, a legit standing within this league. When you talk about Wyatt Teller and Joel Batonio, all pros, all, second team all pros, these guys have been, basically to the mountaintop in this sport, at some point or another. And, now Mason Graham can kind of evaluate himself and kind of see where he measures up. It doesn't matter without the pads. The pads truly tell the story, of course. Now, I mean, you shift that over, of course, to the, other edge rushers on this team and, Isaiah McGuire. And, the early returns are good plus this fall, plus for Isaiah McGuire to this point. He's, doing everything he can to prove to this team that he is going to be a legitimate starting defensive end in the NFL. He's proven it to this point through his 2 years in this league with his run defense ability. Again, top 5 graded by PFF last year in run defense. But now he has to basically put together the pass rush arsenal. And, you can't be a starting defensive end in the NFL and be taken seriously if you're technically just a guy who excels in stopping the run. You got to do it all. You got to bring it all. And, guys will end up on the field more as a pass rusher than they will a run stuffer. And Isaiah McGuire is going to try to make this difficult for the Cleveland Browns to try to take him off the field in obvious pass rush situations. And, look, the same is true for Alex Wright. Alex Wright has been a good player, certainly has had a little bit of success as a pass rusher. But going into this contract year now, Alex Wright basically wants to tell everybody just who he is. One of those things, and most importantly of those things, would be health and Alex Wright getting to stay on the field. He was injured during the draft process, certainly a bit injured here at times with the Cleveland Browns. Needs to kind of string it together, a 16, 17 game season. And, let's see what those numbers look like when, Alex Wright gets that type of snap count and what does it equate to production wise? All fair questions. Absolutely. We'll start to get a little bit better idea of what, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka looks like as he transitions back into the 4-3 after being in the 3-4 in Tampa Bay. How is he gonna look? How does he transition with going back to putting his hand in the dirt? Cam Thomas is the guy I'm kinda touting as maybe your 5th edge to win here. Um, but Cam Thomas had, what would have been a would-be sack today. Cam Thomas has got a great motor. Cam Thomas is a former top 100 pick, legit guy coming out of San Diego State. There's nothing promised to anybody outside of Myles Garrett at the defensive end position. So these guys, knowing that there's the opportunity there to get legitimate playing time, to get an opportunity to contribute, these guys are going to go hard. And, we'll see what, becomes of the fruits of their labor starting on Monday. But, again, the pads are going to tell the story. And, we'll see if the offense is able to carry over today's type of performance once the pads are on. Which is a day they just absolutely desperately needed. And now they have the opportunity to, sit on that and rest on that and feel good about themselves till Monday. Of course, when we fire this all up again with, pads on players, and we'll see who's actually being able to contribute. So certainly the expectations and certainly, you know, the evaluation of just what exactly is going on with the Browns in practice is probably going to amp up come Monday. You're going to get a better idea of, offensive line versus defensive line, offensive line versus linebackers, as far as, run game, run blocking. It's hard to evaluate, some of these runs from Dylan Sampson, as great as they look, but it's hard to truly evaluate them because, yes, it's thud and not really be throwing Dylan Sampson to the ground. But, there once it's the contact is made, that's when the play is gonna get blown dead. It's not like when there's not pads on and basically you see the guys just giving him like a which would be there would be attempts at a tackle without pads on. This changes things. And certainly the evaluation, will certainly pick up with, pads on. And, nobody's gonna go half ass once the pads are on. It's, you can have some things that have gone on these first 4 practices that you can say, well, is it full throttle? Is it full tilt, especially in the teams and the 7-on-7s? But there's guys whose game is based on, their physicality. That's what their, you know, basically their brand name is the type of football player is, how strong do they tackle? How physical are they, in run blocking? I mean, go back to things we've seen from Wyatt Teller for years where he's, taking a guy 15 yards down the field, on a run block. Why? Because he kind of enjoyed it and was a little fun and knew the guy was softer than he was. So it's what he did. It's certainly, I would think, as much as it raises the expectations, it also is going to raise the critiquing and raising, the evaluation, because if you're struggling with the pads on and, the physicalness isn't there, or, you're not tackling, or when, the cornerbacks and the wide receivers are getting into the physical hand fighting, this is going to determine, who's winning and who's losing battles. And, again, you do worry that a guy like Myles Garrett can just really screw up this for everything. And, basically the Browns just say, go sit on your helmet because, we got to have this offense get some work in. And you're just, again, being an absolute menace and an absolute nuisance. And you're just not helping us get to our ultimate goal. So, again, a positive day today after a certainly not positive day yesterday. Um, and, when I walked out of here, out of my office yesterday with it published, and, he was certainly a little frustrated, and, sometimes having all these quarterbacks, again, like I said yesterday, I don't think it's necessarily giving it the overall help because there's just too much. And, I don't know if there's a consistent work level for workload for everybody. That maybe would be the case if there was, only 3 quarterbacks here, or there was a true defined depth chart where we can say, all right, well, number one's getting his work, number two's getting their work, and then there's been some pieces for number three. It's so hard when you have four quarterbacks in camp and there is no semblance of a depth chart in any way whatsoever that, you just don't know. And everybody is different. Just because one guy does better with a larger workload doesn't mean that another guy doesn't necessarily do better with a smaller workload. It's and that's look, this is the situation they're in, and we all knew this is where we are going to be. We were going to go to training camp with a bunch of quarterbacks, and we had no idea necessarily how it was going to shake out until it shook out. And, by that point, we were going to be to the end of August. Not much has changed, certainly to this point. But I do think that one thing changed today. I think that, Shador Sanders stood up and basically announced his presence. And now the Browns have to reevaluate. And I'm sure those discussions are probably going on right now. And I'm sure they will go on with the coaching staff tomorrow as they're setting up the exact plan and what they want to do on Monday. Is that I don't think you can kind of just look at Shador Sanders as he's the fourth quarterback anymore. I think the work he did today kind of proved the Shador Sanders crowd who were wondering why there wasn't enough or more of an opportunity for him. I think today proved that, they are right in those questions and they are right in that now that he has proven with a good practice today with a little bit of a bigger workload that maybe, the tides are changing and, maybe there's an opportunity here that Shador could become a factor more sooner than later. Look, there's no rhyme or reason to how this is going to work out. And, you know, it's not, I'm not going to say that every single one of these guys has an opportunity to be the week one starter because I just don't believe that's the case. I honestly believe the week one starter is between Joe Flacco and between Kenny Pickett. And if it's one of the two, I think for me, it's Joe. Joe's my quarterback one. I just, I have the physical proof, obviously, from 2023 and, just a longer starter within this league. I really think for Kenny Pickett, and maybe it's unfortunate for him, is, you know, Kenny has to blow everyone away for them to tell Joe, hey, thanks for coming out. But, we're going to let you probably go back home. Because, you're not going to trade Joe Flacco at this point in his career. And, this is more of a, you treat him with the respect he deserves at this point in his career, at his age, understanding that, there's probably only a certain couple of teams that Joe would probably necessarily be interested in playing with, has a bunch of kids in here in New Jersey. He wants to be able to be somewhat close, maybe a little further away, depending on, where his status would be in regards to the starting quarterback position. If, it's just for me, it just makes the most sense. It's the easy, and for me, I think it's the best guy to play. And, his situation, not saying that his situation in his family life dictates whether or not he's getting the job. I'm just saying that dictates whether or not, you end up releasing him. You're just not going to trade a guy who's, 40 years old. You can trade Kenny Pickett and flip him for something, not much, but you can flip Kenny Pickett. Then comes into where are you with the rookies and how close are the rookies? And, it seems like they've been giving Gabriel the bigger opportunity. And, Dylan, I wouldn't say he's played poorly at all, but, he certainly didn't have a day with the bigger opportunity through 3 or 4 days that Shador Sanders did in his first day with a little legitimate bigger opportunity. So your winner of Browns camp, training camp, day 4, 100%, Shador Sanders. And I believe the momentum is shifting within that Cleveland Browns quarterback room. And you're going to see a hell of a lot more of Shador Sanders in the coming days and weeks and months. I am Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate everybody that comes out to the OBR every day for the fantastic written content. Check out the OBR.com. Make sure you get that VIP subscriber package. You obviously get the um, insider forums. You also get the, ask the analysts. You can speak, ask questions. You get Lane Atkins just having some fun with you, picking on you a little bit if you're asking the corny questions, but you also get great information from Lane as well. Make sure you're joining us every evening at 6 p.m. on the OBR streaming network, Browns 3D, each night followed by a various of other shows. This was Saturday, so this was a bonus episode. We might be coming back tomorrow, working on something to see if we can get you another episode tomorrow. So make sure keep your eyes and ears out for that as well. But other than that, this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. And we will talk to you all soon.